she's walking with me from the house of red. I hear a child crying, voices heading home. They're praying from their jaws and the forest knows, but it won't share the secret. When the king takes sides, leaving moral mind soldiers take their share. Night seems to sense that now is the time. Deep inside them burns the raging fire of light. He'll take back what he owns. Death cannot take hold if I can keep momentum. Fortresses of stone turn into crystal tears.
Morning, everyone. On behalf of the Andrea Center and the Co-Curricular Committee and Student Symposium, I'd like to welcome you to the last First Mondays event of the year. It's going to be a great way to close the year. Before I begin my introduction to today's speaker, just another reminder, please, turn your phones off. So if you want to just pull them out while I'm talking now and make sure they're off, make sure there's no distractions for anyone else while we're going. And while you have your phones out anyway, if you want to text a couple of your friends and say, hey, there's 1 or 2 spots left, so please come and join. The talk is going to be, they're not going to want to miss it, so you'll do them a favor if you bring them in here. So our speaker today is one of the most exciting young voices in the North American church. Last year, Jet Magazine named her one of the top 5 people to follow on social media, and Christianity Today named her one of the top 33 leaders of the next generation of the church. Her first book, Disunity in Christ, Uncovering the Hidden Forces That Keep Us Apart, received a Leadership Journal Book Award in 2013. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. I can't recommend it strongly enough. It is a great book. I wasn't even finished reading the first chapter. The first chapter is called Right Christian, Wrong Christian. It totally changed how I thought about a lot of things. I probably wasn't even halfway through the first chapter before I had my first plank in my own eye moment where I sort of realized, like, oh, here I am sort of critiquing who I called wrong Christians, right? These people who are doing it bad and they're doing it poorly. And I'm critiquing them for being judgmental. I'm critiquing them for not paying attention to people who don't think like them and don't act like them. And then reading the book, I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing right now to them too. That's not good. So really, I mean, read the book. And I've had the privilege not just of reading the book. I've heard Dr. Cleveland speak a few times before. Every time I've heard her speak, I've not only learned something, but I've been personally challenged to live differently as a result of what she said. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, Christina, but I'm going to say this anyway. If you are open to it, what Christina's talking about can change your life and how you think about your faith. I mean, there's some really important and really big things that are going to be talked about today. And so I meant it. If your friends aren't here, tell them to come here quick because something big and good is going to happen this morning. So when Aaron and I first started putting together a list of sort of filling out the speaker schedule for this semester, the first name we thought of was Christina Cleveland, and the first invitation we sent out was to Christina Cleveland. And I'm so excited that she's able to be here this morning, and in a few minutes you will be too. So please join me in welcoming Christina Cleveland.
Good morning. Good morning. It's really an honor to be here, and I want to start by just saying a lot of what I'll talk about this morning, if you want to go deeper into these ideas, you should check out my book. As you can see, everybody's already reading it. It's wildly popular among the illiterate set. But just so you know, it's a great resource to keep having these conversations. And my editor made me write discussion questions after each chapter, so you can even have conversations with your roommates and your friends, and hopefully that's helpful. Tonight we'll talk, we'll dive deeper into my book and mostly talk about what I'm working on in my new book, which is called The Priesthood of the Privileged. So you'll get some content that most people have not had access to yet. Like I said, I'm honored to be here, and what I want to talk to you guys about today is actually a pretty complex topic. It's about connecting with people who are different, and we're actually going to focus on race this morning. We'll probably talk more about class this evening, but this morning I want to talk about race, and conversations about race and unity in the body of Christ and also beyond, across racial lines, is a very, very difficult topic. And I just want to name that. I think it's good to just start off by saying this can be awkward. This conversation can be awkward. When I was in high school, I was 15 years old, and I'd grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is relatively diverse. And I ended up going last minute to a boarding school in New Hampshire. And at this particular boarding school, it was really wealthy, it was really white, and most of the students there were white, and they'd come from backgrounds where they hadn't interacted much with people who were different than them. And somehow I became friends with this guy named John, who was a white guy from upstate New York, really nice guy. He loves college basketball, I love college basketball. I'm rooting for Duke. So I think we became friends through that sort of, just he was a Syracuse fan, I'm actually a Cal Berkeley fan, and so we were friends. And I just remember one day talking to John, really wealthy, comes from a white background, and it occurred to me that I was probably his only black friend ever, So I said that to him. I said, John, I think I'm your only black friend. And he was like, no, that's not true. My maid is black. And I was like, and he said it as seriously as possible, and he was serious. And I said, well, I would love to know if she thinks you guys are friends. That would be awesome. But that was sort of the reality of the people that I was going to school with, right? There was just not a lot of cross-cultural interaction. So one day I was hanging out with my friend Kai, who was also black. There were like maybe 30 black female students. I was friends with all of them. And Kai and I were playing ping pong in my dorm, and John walked in one day, and I said, oh, this is great. I'll introduce John and Kai. I love both of them. They're both great friends. I can double John's black friends in like one moment just by introducing him to Kai. And so I said, Kai, meet John. John, meet Kai. And Kai said, it's nice to meet you. And John said, hey, I know you. You're in my math class. And Kai said, actually, I don't think I'm in your math class. And he said, yep, you definitely are. And at this school, they use the Socratic method for teaching. So there are like 8 people in your classes. So you really should know who's in your class. And he said, no, I'm telling you, you're in my math class. And she said, no, I'm telling you, I'm not in your math class. And he said, well, some black girl who looks just like you is in my math class. Awkward, right? These conversations are awkward. Cross-cultural interactions are awkward. What's really funny is I see the people of color in the room kind of smiling and nodding their head. Meanwhile, the white people are like, wait, what do I do? Do I laugh? What do I do? Right? Awkward. So it turns out our friend Addie, who is black, but looks nothing like Kai, was in John's math class, and he had confused the two. And today we'll talk a little bit about why that happens. Why do we think they are all the same, whoever they are? But I think it's important just to say, whenever we have these sorts of conversations, there's a 100% chance that you're going to say something stupid. There's a 100% chance you're going to not know the answer. There's a 100% chance that it's going to be uncomfortable. But I still think that despite all of those things, we are called to push through and have these conversations so that we actually can be people who, like Jesus, learn to love really cross-culturally and learn to honor the image of God in people who are different than him. And we'll talk a lot more about Jesus' example tonight. But I want to start by just pointing us to something that Paul said in Philippians 2. And this is something that actually really haunts me me as a member of the family of God, and it certainly instructs the way that I try to live my life, and I don't always succeed at this. But in Philippians 2, I'll go ahead and read it to you. Paul is talking to the Philippian church, which is an incredibly diverse church. It's diverse ethnically and racially. It's diverse in terms of free people and slave people, so there's some class differences there. It's diverse in terms of gender. And this is what Paul is calling them to. He says, "If then there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from God's love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete. Be of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord, and of one mind." And I love this because Paul is like, he's being a Trinitarian theologian, even in this particular 2 verses, where he's calling our attention to all 3 members of the Trinity and saying, hey, we're united. You know, Trinitarian theologians call this perichoresis, this unity in the midst of difference in the Trinity. And he's pointing us to that. He's saying, look at this encouragement from Christ. Look at God's love. Look at the sharing in the Spirit that you have. This is the model. We're all different members, but we're all one. And we are interdependent, and we influence each other. And he's saying, if you really get this, if you get the way that God is, the way that we are cross-culturally relational at our very being, then you will do the same thing. And again, he's talking to the Philippian church, which is super diverse. And he's saying, if you get this, you're going to be of the same mind. You're going to have the same love. You're going to be in full accord. That does not mean you have to agree on everything. I think of it in terms of sharing brain space. Can I understand what it's like to be you? And can you take the time to understand what it's like to be me? What are the challenges that I face as a Black woman in America? What are the challenges that my neighbors, my Hmong neighbors in the Twin Cities face? Perhaps as undocumented immigrants, perhaps as not, perhaps as people who don't have an actual homeland. What's life like in their shoes? How can I share brain space? This is a tall order, and it's hard for us to do. I mean, we have a hard time sharing brain space with people who go to the church down the street from ours, right? I mean, I chuckled as I drove into town yesterday and saw like all 12 of the Reformed churches. And it's like that everywhere, right? And it's fascinating because we're so good at connecting with people who are just like us. And to the extent that we have a hard time connecting with the church down the block, let alone people who come from an entirely different background, even though that's what God is calling us to do. So today, I just want to kind of give us a few opportunities to think about, why is this so hard? And maybe, hopefully, we can uncover some of these processes so that it becomes just a little bit less hard. And one of the things that I want to start us off with is thinking about the way that we categorize. The ways that we sort of divide ourselves and see other people as really different than us, or see them as all the same, or maybe choose not to intentionally connect with people who are different than us. A lot of this has to do with the way that we simply categorize our world. So we categorize everything, right? I mean, like, historians take time and they categorize it into eras. And biologists take animals and they classify them into species. And social and political scientists look at states and they say some of these are blue states and some of these are red states. And we categorize everything. Even when I first came up here this morning, about a half hour ago, maybe 45 minutes ago, I walked onto this stage and I saw this podium, and I had never seen this podium before in my life. Now, typically, when you see something that's completely novel to you, you would think that you would go up to it and you would want to investigate it and be like, what is this? What should I do with it? Should I eat it? Is it going to spontaneously self-combust? What is this new thing that I've never seen before? But I didn't have to do that with this podium, even though I had never seen it before, because I have a category for podiums. And so I was able to take one glance at it. It remotely fit the category of my understanding of podiums. And so I just kind of, without even thinking about it, threw this podium into my category of podiums, and I made some assumptions about what it could do for me, whether I should run from it, whether it was safe or not. I concluded that it is safe. But here's the thing, right? We want to do this all the time because we are cognitive misers. That's the social psychology term for this. We have limited cognitive energy. We can't think about everything because we're constantly getting bombarded with information all the time. And so we actually just block out most of it and focus on what we want to focus on. We select what we want to pay attention to. And so categorizing helps us do that. I don't have to stop and interview the podium because I can just use my shortcut of categories to make some assumptions about what this podium can do for me. So categorizing most of the time is awesome. It helps us save time and energy, and we would be really, really tired if we did not have that as a tool. Now, categorizing is great, though, until it's not. Now, you might not be able to see these very well, but I want you to look and see. So here you have a bunch of pictures one picture of a lot of men carrying flowers. Now, which one of these men is actually a threat? Can anyone find him? Wow, it's kind of hard. Okay, so the fourth row down, all the way to the right, with the flowers, he's carrying a gun. But oftentimes, because of categorizing, our attention is drawn to the person who's different, particularly if that person fits a category, right? So you might think the guy in the second row was the threat when really he's just a really big guy with a bunch of flowers. Okay, what about this one? Here's another one. Who's the threat? It's hard because it's a little small. The bottom one, the fifth row down, bottom row, second one in, has looks like grenades around his waist. So he's a plumber who's also going to blow up your house too after he fixes your toilet. Okay, and then this last one here. Which one's the threat? So there's kind of a skinhead-looking person, and so your category of a skinhead might draw your attention to that person, but who's the real threat? Fourth row down, the first one has a gun, right? So that's the problem with categorizing, right? I mean, categorizing draws our attention to the categories that we might have some sort of idea about, and sometimes with mental shortcuts, we miss important information and we actually miss out on who we actually should be focusing on. One of the other downsides of categorizing beyond this, though, is that we tend to engage in what we call outgroup homogeneity. This perception that whoever they are, is all the same. Now, here's how this happens. And this is what happened with my friend John. Because of categorizing, we want to know who is us and who is them. So we automatically set up this distinction between us and them. So we categorize, right? So right now we're at Dort, and there's Northwestern just a few minutes away, and they are them, right? We are us, and I'll be part of us. I'll be part of Dort today, and they are them, right? We automatically set up this distinction, so we have a category. So we know who's part of our group and who's part of their group, and that way if we encounter someone who's part of their group, we can quickly be cognitively miserly, right? And say, oh, they're a Northwestern person. They're not a Dort person. So we set up this us-them distinction, and then we automatically say they are all the same, whoever they are. And so I have a couple illustrations to show you how this plays out, in addition to my friend John, who thought that Kai was in his math class. I don't know if you remember this, but last year at the Super Bowl, Lawrence Fishburne, who's a black actor, kind of a baby boomer, probably in his 60s or 70s, he was in a Super Bowl commercial. And then after that, Samuel L. Jackson, another black actor, was confused for him repeatedly. A lot of people thought that Samuel L. Jackson was the person who was in this Super Bowl commercial, right? So they are all the same. And unfortunately for him, an LA entertainment reporter on air made this mistake when he was talking to Samuel L. Jackson. So I have the video to show you how Samuel L. Jackson responds.
I tell you what, you working for Marvel, the Super Bowl commercial, did you get a lot of reaction to that Super Bowl commercial?
What Super Bowl commercial?
Oh, you know what? I've been my mistake. You know what?
See, you're as crazy as the people on Twitter.
Right.
I'm not Lawrence Fishburne.
That's my fault. I know that. That was my fault. My mistake. You know what?
We don't all look alike.
Flavia, you're
We may
exactly
be
right.
all black and famous,
You
but
are
we all don't look
guilty.
alike.
I am guilty.
Next
question.
I am guilty.
He thought you were Bob Dylan.
Right. That's right.
You're the entertainment reporter.
I know. I'm telling
You're the
you why.
entertainment reporter
Right.
for this station.
Flog.
And you don't know the difference between
I
me and Lawrence
know.
Fishburne.
My mistake. My mistake. I apologize. Really, my big mistake. Let's talk
That
about.
must be a very short line for your job
I'll
outside
say.
there.
No, it probably would not be hard to get another person to sit right here. Let's talk about RoboCop.
Oh, hell no. Really? Really?
I apologize.
I'm the other guy.
But-
I'm the other guy. The
I know.
other one. What's in your wallet?
Right. That's it.
I'm that
Exactly
guy.
right.
There's more than one black guy doing a commercial.
There it is. No question about that.
I'm the what's in your wallet black guy.
Okay.
He's the car black guy.
There it is.
Morgan Freeman is the other credit card black guy. You only hear his voice though, so you probably won't confuse him with Lawrence Fishburne.
You're 100% right. To RoboCop, were
There's
you
a
a fan?
heavyweight black guy that's like putting cash down in the seats in a baseball stadium, but he's also the black guy that turns off the house, the water, and the lights when his kid tells him the house is cool. I'm not that guy either.
Do we want to do a list of all the people that you're not?
And I've actually never done a McDonald's or a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial. I know that's surprising.
Right. Fair enough.
Oh, man.
To the original.
And I'm the only black guy in RoboCop that's not a criminal,
Okay.
other than Michael K. White.
Were you a fan of the Peter Weller version?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a really, I mean, as a social psychologist, this is fascinating to me because he's drawing on a lot of the categories that people in our society have for black men, right? I mean, he's pointing out, A, we're not all the same. B, we're not all criminals. C, we're not all people who like McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken. I mean, he's just nailing this guy and naming some of these very important categories. Now, here's the thing. When we rely on categories, we make mistakes like this, and they can be really detrimental. And we'll talk more about this tonight, and just exactly what the American imagination in terms of categories, how do Americans imagine black men, and how detrimental that actually is, and what the consequences are for people's lives and their identities. And I can tell you right now, I mean, my brother, well, I'm gonna just tell you the study really quickly, and then I'll tell you how my brother responded to it. My brother is a black man. A social psychologist named Keith Payne was really interested in seeing what is the category for black men? Like, how do people perceive black men? The average American of all races, all ages, what is the perception? And he did a study that's actually pretty brilliant. What he did was he initially flashed on a computer screen a subliminal picture of either a black man or a white man. Now, a subliminal presentation is when something is flashed so quickly before your eyes that you don't even consciously register that you saw it. If something's flashed in a 200 to 300 milliseconds range, on one level you're conscious of it, but you're not conscious that you're conscious of it. So you will say, I didn't see anything, even though your mind registers it at a very low level, and it then can influence your behaviors afterwards. So first they flashed either a picture subliminally of a white man or a black man, and then they flashed a picture of either a tool or a gun. Now, this was not subliminal, so it was flashed very quickly, and it was kind of hazy, so people had to make a guess, like a snap judgment, is this a tool or a gun? But at least they could say, I had seen something. I know I saw something. I can't tell if it was a tool or a gun. And they were like, just make your best guess, snap judgment. Because that's usually how we categorize people, right? It's not like we stop and we have all the time in the world to analyze someone. Usually we're making these very quick snap judgments, sometimes based on ambiguous information. And so that's what he did in this study. And what he did was he paired whether it was a white man in a tool or a white man in a gun, or a black man in a tool and a black man in a gun. So if you're a participant in his study, you're getting flashed all these pictures, and you just have to quickly know, is it a gun, tool, gun, tool, gun, tool? And then he looked to see what sorts of errors people made. And his prediction was that if a white man was subliminally flashed before a gun, people would mistake the gun for a tool. But if it was a black man who was flashed right before a tool, people would mistake the tool for a gun. And that's exactly what he found. He found that people associate black men with guns, even when they're really supposed to be associated with a tool, and they associate white men with tools, even when they've been paired with a gun. And so the big takeaway is that people perceive black men as dangerous and white men as safe or industrious or off to work. And this is a study that's been replicated dozens of times. This is a study that has been replicated with all sorts of populations, all races, both genders. And when I told my brother, who's going to be 36 tomorrow, he's a graduate student at Yale Divinity School, training to be a pastor, he just responded, and I told him the results of the study, and he just had this very painful laugh. I mean, I could just hear the pain in his voice. And he said, why would anyone even bother running that study? Anyone who's talked to a black man knows that we are seen as dangerous. And just this year, so he'll be graduating this spring, and just this year, this academic year alone, he's been stopped 4 times on his way, the 2-block walk from the Divinity School to his apartment. 4 times he's been stopped by the New Haven police in Connecticut and searched and frisked. And he has to stand there calm every single time, even though it's humiliating and it's demoralizing, and his identity is being completely tarnished. And I think about that, and I wonder, do we really understand the power of our categories and what that means for people? Another example of this that often comes up when they are all the same, particularly when these categories are pretty dishonoring, is I found this graphic, which I think is helpful. So it's, they are all the same. Now, this is assuming you're a Westerner and you're not from the continent of Africa. And every single country in Africa is just called Africa. Except for if you notice on the southern end where South Africa is, it says white Africa, right? So they are all the same, but not perhaps the people that we can identify with if we are European Westerners. One more example of this before I talk a little bit more about how this can affect us as people of God. I don't want to just pick on white people's perceptions, because it turns out these go both ways, right? All sorts of people can engage in this out-group homogeneity. They are all the same. And I don't know if you're familiar with this book, Stuff White People Like. It's a blog too. I think it's hilarious because I'm not white. So this guy, it's great because it's this guy who's white, who's made a list of things that white people like. And he's writing it in this sort of sarcastic way to people of color. So I'm sort of his target audience for this book. And he's saying, this is what white people like. So if you want to get in good with white people, just mention the things on this list. So these are some of the things on the list. Religions their parents don't belong to, being an expert on your culture, nonprofits, organic food, St. Patrick's Day. Another one that I like that I didn't put up there is he says assists in basketball, like white people love assists. So One of the ones that I think is really funny is outdoor performance clothes. And I actually quote this particular passage in my book. And you know how as someone who's not white, I do think it's interesting that white people are like always wearing like a North Face jacket even when they're not climbing a mountain, you know, like just all the time. So here's what he says about outdoor performance clothes and white people. And again, he's engaging, I mean, if you think about it, it's the same dynamic, right? This out-group homogeneity, they are all the same. I've categorized white people as a non-white person. So the white people are them, and it's easy for me to read this list and say, yep, absolutely, that's how they all are, right? So this is what he's saying about outdoor performance clothes and why white people like them. The main reason why white people like these clothes is that it allows them to believe that at any moment they could find themselves with a Thule rack on top of their car headed to a national park. It could be 4 p.m. on a Saturday when they might get a call. Hey man, you know what we need to do? Kayak, then camping right now. I'm on my way to get you. There is no time to change clothes. Though it is unlikely that they will receive this call, white people hate the idea of missing an opportunity to enjoy outdoor activities because they weren't wearing the right clothes. If you plan on spending part of your weekend with a white person, it is strongly recommended that you purchase a jacket or some sort of high-performance t-shirt, which is like a regular shirt, but just a lot more expensive. So, right, he's showing that anyone can engage in this out-group homogeneity effect, right? Anyone can say, can label a group as they, and then say they are all the same. Now, these are kind of funny examples. Of course, the one with my brother and the way black men are perceived isn't as funny. But I want to talk a little bit about how this sort of works within the family of God, because let's just like bring it home and talk about how we sort of interact with each other. And one of the things that I've found as I travel around the country is that lots and lots and lots of Christian organizations are not great at intercultural, multicultural, racial diversity issues. And so I was working with one school. It's a lot like Dort, actually, predominantly white Christian college, about 1,200 students. So I think you guys have 1,500, so just a little bit smaller, but similar. And the president of this campus, of this college, and the board had brought me on to campus to talk about the fact that most people of color, they have like a retention problem when it comes to people of color. So they're like, students will come for a year or two, but then they'll leave. Faculty will come for a year or two, but then they'll leave. It doesn't seem like anybody really wants to stay here. Can you help us? And so I said, sure. Maybe we should start by doing essentially like a focus group or some sort of survey, contacting the people of color who have been involved with this organization, finding out what their specific experiences are. That way we can define a diversity program that would address those specific concerns. And so the president and the board, they said, great, sounds awesome, you seem competent, go ahead and come up with a plan for this. And so I did, and I came back and I said, here's my plan, here's how much time it's going to cost, here's how many resources it's going to consume, how much money it's going to cost. I'm going to go and interview different alumni pockets around the country. You can do some online surveys. And the president, a white man, said to me, you know, this seems like a really wonderful plan. And I'm sure it would lead to really interesting results. He's like, but it seems like it'll take up a lot of resources. And, you know, I could probably tell you why people of color don't really like being on this campus. So why do we even really need to do the whole plan that you came up with? And I looked at him and I said, okay, so let me get this straight. You're the white male president of an organization that admittedly has a diversity problem. And he's like, yes. And I said, and you think you can fix the diversity problem without any actual input from diverse people? And he was like, well, when you put it that way, it sounds really bad. And I was like, well, it is really bad. That's why. And as I was talking to him, it became clear. Now, this is a guy, great heart, loves Jesus, cares about people, wants to be a good president, cares about his school. I believe he cares about every single student in his school, regardless of race or gender or class or any of those things. But he had fallen, as we got talking, it was clear that he had fallen into this trap, outgroup homogeneity. They are all the same. And saying they are all the same is just another way of saying they don't bring a lot of richness and variability to the table. It's another way of saying they're pretty simplistic. It's another way of saying we need us at the table because we aren't all the same. We're unique and varied and interesting, and we all have different viewpoints, but they are all the same. And it was so easy for him to just say, they're so much the same, they don't bring anything to the table. We actually don't even need them at the table. We can fix our problems without them. And just like that, he had dishonored the image of God and a whole group of people. He lumped them all into one category, and he said, we don't need them. And when I go back to perichoresis in the Trinity, when I go back to the way the Trinity interacts with each other, they're interdependent. God can't be God without input from Jesus. The Spirit can't be the Spirit without input from God, without influence from God. And when we engage in outgroup homogeneity, when we perceive them as all the same, even if it's just like an accident of categorizing, we can so quickly fall into this trap where we think we don't really need them because they're all the same. And we're the ones who bring everything. And so we just need us. Or maybe we need them, but we just need one of them, a token. If we just get one of them on our committee, they can speak for everyone else because, again, they're all the same. We don't practice the humility that I think is inherent in the Trinity, and also I would say is inherent in Paul's metaphor of the body of Christ, where we're saying, I absolutely need your perspective. I can't be Christena without your perspective. I can't truly see God without your perspective. I can't engage my world without your perspective. I need your perspective more than I need my group's perspective. And this all happens simply because we categorize. We don't even mean to do it. Like I said, this college president is a wonderful man who didn't mean to disrespect, he didn't mean to exclude, but he did. And that's because he wasn't thinking about how he was perceiving other groups. I'm going to keep moving on because there's some other things that happen simply by categorizing that really disrupt unity and disrupt the way that we can perceive others. Another one is inaccurate meta-perceptions. Now, when it comes to groups coming together and interacting, it doesn't really matter what they think of us, whoever they is. All that matters is what we think they think of us. And it turns out that these meta-perceptions, what we think they think of us, they're almost always pessimistic. We almost always think they don't like us or they don't want to know us. I'm friends with this church in the Twin Cities. That's a really it's a prominently white church, but they're really passionate about trying to build cross-cultural connections in the city. And they had put together this multicultural racial reconciliation event where they were trying to get as many prominently black churches and a bunch of prominently white churches together in one room to interact with each other. And this is the kind of stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to be there just to see how it all goes down. Even if I think it's ill-fated, I'm actually more likely to go. So I was there, and the thing is what they had done they had done everything by the book. Now tonight I'm going to talk about why I actually think these sorts of events are a waste of time and actually are hurtful. But if you were going to do an event like this, they did it by the book, right? So they made sure that the leadership team planning the event had black people and white people. They made sure that half the tickets to the event were sold to black churches, half the tickets were sold to white churches. They made sure that the pastors and all the churches involved were preaching the importance of racial reconciliation and it's important to connect with people who are different than you. They build the event as a come and make a friend with someone who's different than you kind of event, so people knew this is the whole point of going to this event is to do some cross-cultural interaction. What else did they do? Oh, they had a soul food restaurant come in and cater, and yeah, right. So maybe it's an inside joke there, but they had a soul food restaurant come and cater, and they decided to have tables that were kind of bar height and no chairs. That way people would mingle, you couldn't just sit down and hang out with people who are just like you. So I'm like, oh, this is going to be real interesting. So I show up and I walk into the room. I'm maybe 15 minutes late, and all the white people are on this side of the room, and all the black people are on this side of the room. I mean, there was an invisible wall in between. It's there might as well have been a wall. And it was also just interesting as a social psychologist to kind of see, so all the black people are like in three-piece suits, dressed to the nines. All the white people, North Face, jackets, flip-flops, so it just not only racially, but just culturally, there are these major differences, right? So I walk over to the white side, I'm like, hey, white people, like, why are you not interacting with the black people? And they were like, well, I think they're over there because they don't really want to talk to us. Like, that's why. So then I went over to the black side. I was like, hey, black people, why are you not talking to the white people? And they were like, well, they don't want to talk to us. That's why they're over there. I don't think they want to talk to us. And I was thinking, everyone paid $20 and bought a ticket so they can make a friend from another race. That's why you're here, right? But it's not happening, right? I mean, there's several reasons why it wasn't happening, and we can talk more about that tonight. But one important reason is these inaccurate meta-perceptions. We automatically assume they don't want to know us. They don't like us. It's a natural consequence of categorizing. As soon as we have an us and a them, we have already decided whoever them is, they don't want to have anything to do with this. My students at Bethel, which I think in terms of demographics is similar to this campus, my white students will often say, why do all the black kids sit together in the cafeteria? My first response is, why do all the white kids sit together in the cafeteria? Because that's happening too, but no one really calls it that. But I'm also like, well, what do you think? And they think, well, I think they just, why would they even be here at Bethel if they don't want to talk to us? Well, wow, you're making a lot of assumptions about whether or not they want to talk to you. And it's simply because of these inaccurate meta-perceptions. They don't like us, and they don't want to know us. So at this point, right, just by categorizing, we've already decided that there's an us and a them. We've already decided that they are all the same. And we've also decided that they don't want to even talk to us. So this is like not a great place to be at in terms of coming together, right, in unity. And so the third one that I want to talk about is beyond this, we exaggerate differences. So not only are they all the same, and not only do they not want to talk to us, but they are also so different from us. I mean, so different. So if I talked to you guys, and if I were in a classroom, and I said, tell me all the ways in which you guys are different from Northwestern, you would probably come up with a million reasons why you're so different from Northwestern, because that's how groups work, right? We are so different from them. And I found this to be the case when I first moved to Minneapolis. I moved there from California. I was a professor at Westmont College, which is in Santa Barbara. So that's where I spent like pretty much all my 20s. And then I moved to Minneapolis in the summer of 2010. And I don't know if you know this about, are there any Minnesotans here? Okay, I'll probably offend you, sorry. So, like, Minnesotans are an interesting bunch, and I've enjoyed getting to know Minnesotans in the last 5 years. But one thing I've learned is Minnesotans are really serious about their weather. And it might be the same here in Iowa, I'm not sure. But, like, in California, you pretty much talk about the weather when there's, like, nothing else to talk about. So like you've exhausted every other possible topic, and then you talk about the weather, right? In Minnesota, there might be like 5 pressing international crises and international news stories going on, and Minnesotans will just bypass all the interesting stuff and go straight to the weather, because it's like a serious topic, It's like, and so that was very new to me, and so I had just moved there. It was July of 2010, and I had 20 conversations my first month in Minnesota. Every single one went exactly like this. Because Minnesotans are like friendly, kind of. And so, and so they're like, oh, you're new here. Like, what's going on? What's your story? And I say, oh, I just moved here from Santa Barbara. Oh my gosh, you just moved here from Santa Barbara? Have you ever experienced the Minnesota weather? Nope, it's July, I haven't yet. You're going to die, right? I mean, that's just sort of how it always, every single conversation. And I was always, and it was interesting, and so it started getting old. And so one day I was at Trader Joe's. Do you guys have Trader Joe's down here? I don't know. Okay, it's this like hippie grocery store. So I was at Trader Joe's, and they have their job is at the cash register. Their job is to talk to you, like they have to engage the customers. So they're super friendly. So this guy was checking out my groceries, and he's like, "Tell me your story." That's a classic thing they would do at Trader Joe's. And so I'm like, "Oh, I just moved here from California." And so the whole thing happens, right? Where he's like, "Oh, have you been here for a Minnesota winter? No, you're going to die." Okay. So at this point, I was like ready to push back because I was tired of being told that I wasn't fit to be a Minnesotan. And so I pushed back by saying, well, I did go to boarding school and college in New Hampshire. It's pretty cold there in the winter too. And he was like, no, it's way worse here. And I was like, okay, so when did you live in New Hampshire so that you could compare and contrast the two winters? And he said, I've never been to New Hampshire. I don't even know where New Hampshire is. I'm just telling you it's worse. And so then, now, there are 3 people behind me in line at Trader Joe's, and they're all Minnesotans, so they're involved, right? So they're like chiming in, and I'm like, well, I don't know, especially where I went to college. It's up in the White Mountains, pretty, cold blizzards, and they're like, oh, but it's a wet cold here that just chills you to the bones, So they're going back and forth. We're talking for 10 minutes, just arguing over who has experienced the worst winters. Me in New Hampshire or all these Minnesotans, and they're like bringing up the 1991 Halloween blizzard and all these things. They're like, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then finally I realized, I said, does someone have to win this conversation? Because if you think about it, we've all been through a lot of hard winters, and maybe we should just be hugging each other and consoling each other and saying good job on surviving. We're focusing on what divides us when really people from New Hampshire and people from Minnesota have a lot in common. And pretty much everyone in the South or in the West would just look at any of these states up here and just be like, it's all the same. Who cares where you are? It's just cold in the winter. And that was a really powerful moment for me in thinking about the way groups work, right? We're so invested in being different. We're so invested in not looking at the commonalities, but in looking at what divides us, what differentiates us, what makes us maybe a little bit different. And the reason why we do this is because it's the categorizing, right? It goes back to this pesky categorizing that's mostly helpful, but sometimes not helpful. If we want to use categorizing as a way to basically save mental energy, it's important that we have really clear boundaries, right? I don't want to have to be confused about who's a Minnesota person and who's a New Hampshire person. So it's in my best interest to exaggerate those differences so that it's very clear who's who, and I don't have to waste a lot of my mental energy trying to discern these fuzzy categories. We hate fuzzy categories, which is why we hate black sheep. Black sheep are people who are part of our group, but they don't toe the party line in one important way. They blur the categories of our group. And it turns out we tend to be more hateful and more hurtful towards those groups of people. So we exaggerate our differences. We are so different from them. But it takes it starts to get really dark pretty quickly as a result of this. Because at this point, like I said, we've already decided there's an us and there's a them, right? So we're already separated. They are all the same. They don't want to know us. And they are so different than us. So why wouldn't we just stick to our group, to the people who come from our same socioeconomic background, the people who go to our same church, have the exact same theology that we have, vote the same way that we do, perceive current events like something like Black Lives Matter or something or immigration reform exactly the way that we do? Why wouldn't we want to do that at this point? Because we've already convinced ourselves that this is the best way to go, just hang out with people who are just like us. But it gets trickier in the sense that not long after we have exaggerated our differences, we start to do something that's really interesting. We call it infrahumanization, and it's where we start to not only say we are so different than them, but it turns into we are better than them. And this is because our group identities, the way that we categorize ourselves, and we might say we're Pentecostal, or we're Reformed, or we're Lutheran, or we're Dort students, or we're Northwestern students, or we're white, or we're black, or we're middle class, or we're poor, or we're American, or we're Syrian. These group identities, they greatly affect our self-esteem. And we want to always feel good about ourselves, That's like a basic human need, to feel good about ourselves. And we'll do all sorts of irrational jumping jacks in order to maintain our high self-esteem. And we're pretty good at it, actually. An average American has a self-esteem of about 7 or 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being good. So it works. But part of this has to do with the way that we identify with our groups, because our group identity overlaps with our self-esteem. So we want to feel good about our group, because that makes us feel good about ourselves. And so we engage in what's called infrahumanization. It's subtle. Oh, it's so subtle. But it's really, really powerful. Infrahumanization is when we ascribe uniquely human characteristics to our group. And actually, typically the way infrahumanization works is that we don't even mention the other group. They're the comparison point, but we don't even actually have to explicitly mention them. By only ascribing uniquely human characteristics to our group, we can already ascribe humanity to our group, and the implication being the other group is not human. So here's an example of how this might work. So infrahumanization could happen when you ascribe like logic to your group. So higher order cognitive processing, this is like very well-developed prefrontal cortex. This is something that humans have, right? This is something that distinguishes us from most other animals. It's what humanizes us. And we have logic, and we have abstract thinking, and we have critical thinking skills that come out of those, come out of this prefrontal cortex. And so we can look at a situation, and I see this happen all the time, and we can say, we are looking at this rationally. We are looking at it logically. The implication being they are not. So I heard this a lot last summer around Ferguson, where people were saying, like, we look at it logically. I don't understand why they can't just look at it logically. We're being rational about this. And without even thinking about it, we've already dehumanized the other group by implying that they're not being rational, that they're not capable of being rational, that they're not human. Another way this happens is by ascribing secondary emotions to our group. So secondary emotions are like guilt and shame. They're the ones that make you human, right? I mean, if you can't experience shame when you've done something wrong, you're like Dexter or something, right? Like you're like a serial killer, you're like a sociopath, right? That's what distinguishes humans from non-humans. And so I see people who, I live in North Minneapolis, which is a low-income, predominantly black community, significant population on welfare and other social services. I see people hear people talk about my neighborhood and say, I would feel guilty if I were mooching off the government like that. The implication being, they don't feel guilty, they can't feel guilty, they're inhuman. And what's amazing about this infrahumanization, it's so subtle, we often don't even know we're doing it, but all these research studies show that when we engage in this, our self-esteem bumps up significantly. It's actually probably one of the more effective ways of increasing our self-esteem, by simply, in a very subtle way, dehumanizing them, whoever they are. And this could be on racial lines, theological lines, gender lines, class, you name it, east-west. So these forces are so powerful, they're so natural. They happen without us even meaning for them to happen. They happen, and they happen by people who are good-hearted, well-intentioned. They want to do the right thing, but we all fall prey to them. So those are just 4 I want to talk about: outgroup homogeneity, inaccurate metaperceptions, exaggerated differences, and infrahumanization. So just without even knowing it, without even thinking about it, we've already decided there's an us and there's a them. They are all the same. They don't want to know us. They're so different than us. And we are actually a little bit better than them. And that's where we're going to end. And tonight we'll talk more about how do we actually get past these natural processes to build unity. And I hope you'll come back tonight, and we'll have some time for Q&A too. I'd love to pray for us real quick. I'm sure we're running out of time. I actually don't have a watch, but I'll pray for us really quick and then we can go. God, I thank you for this wonderful community here at Dort. I thank you that your image is uniquely displayed in each individual in this room, and is uniquely displayed in every cultural group represented in this room. And I thank you that together as one body, we can start to get a glimpse of who you really are. May we strive to value your image in each other. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks to everyone for coming this morning. Again, like Dr. Drew said, this is the last First Monday speakers of the year. So thanks for everyone who came out and made this a great semester for that. Thank you also, Dr. Cleveland, for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciated that. If anyone would like to have the opportunity to ask Dr. Cleveland some more questions over lunch, there are 5 tickets available for the lunch session after this. If you're interested, come to Dr. Drew up front here and he'll give you a ticket. Again, we invite you here, actually in classroom building 1606 in the science building, to hear Dr. Cleveland talk again at 7:30 p.m. She'll be giving a talk titled, "Why Do They Seem So Different from Me?" As she talked about. So hope to see you there. Have a great day.